stop politicizing the science. Tests of scientific literacy show that the deniers are no less knowledgeable than the believers. Vaccines are probably one of the best things our species has ever done. The prospect of nuclear war would be so unthinkable, quite literally lead to the extinction of the human species. One could worry that once that taboo has been breached, once the line had been crossed, many things to fear.
He is the Harvard professor, Steven Pinker.
This lack of separation between the executive and the judiciary, so Trump being able to elect 3 officials onto the Supreme Court.
The United States already is behind the curve in terms of global progress.
The reduction in absolute poverty in the last 200 years, 95% to now something like 13.
The moral imperative is not that everyone have the same. The moral imperative is that everyone has enough.
It's interesting because one of the things I think that this vaccine debate also opens up is the question around free speech and with no platforming. As we know, it was due to other things as well, but Donald Trump, for example, was taken off Twitter, now X, as a result of spewing what we clearly take as misinformation, but what other people took as either evidently true or true with evidence. How would you, where do you think the limits of that free speech are whilst trying to No, go ahead.
Yes, I mean, I think that even the staunchest free speech advocates, and in the United States is the world's bastion of free speech. We have far more liberal laws than most other Western democracies. For example, in the United States, hate speech is constitutionally protected. We don't have laws against Holocaust denial, as many European countries do. But even in the United States, even the ultra speech libertarian United States, there are recognized limits on constitutionally unprotected speech. Obvious things like crimes that by their very definition involve speech, like extortion, like bribery, defamation, but incitement to imminent lawless activity is another category that is not protected. And if a private platform like X were to adopt a free speech respecting policy, I think that people would, even the free speech near absolutists would say, well, it would be okay to draw the line when it comes to encouraging violence. And so if the argument for removing Trump's account was that he did incite violence, that may be a defensible line. If it's that he's a right-wing fascist populist and we don't like that kind of people here, that I think would not cross the line. That ought to be protected. Although again, another distinction, of course, is that a private platform should be able to do whatever it wants. I mean, that's its free speech. And so it's the same rules that apply to government restrictions may not necessarily apply to private for-profit platforms like X. Now, on the other side, one could say, well, yeah, that's technically true, but it has become so influential that it has become like a quasi-public space. I think it'd be hard to push that argument too far, but that is an argument that could be made.
I'm interested what you'd think about. So no platforming is a big topic in the Oxford Union right now, and I'm interested in where you would draw that line. Incitement to violence, of course, I would agree. But for example, a speaker called Kathleen Stock, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, came to the Oxford Union, and she has trans skeptical views, essentially. And I wonder whether you think that would be a case for no platforming, or as much as they're legally allowed, where do you think the line should be drawn for a platform like the Oxford Union, which can spread potentially harmful information?
Well, then that speaks really to the mission of a university, where the laws that apply to the public sphere have to be adapted to the special context of a university. What's a university all about? Why do we meaning speaking as a professor, enjoy certain perquisites and privileges? And that's because we're the place where, in theory, knowledge is discovered and transmitted. And that means that universities do, I think, have a special obligation to give a wide berth to speech and opinions, because the only way you can discover knowledge is if people can broach ideas and evaluate them. No one is omniscient, no one is infallible, and if you're in the business of discovering knowledge, that means you can't have commissars and priests and censors deciding which opinions may or may not be expressed. Now, of course, universities have to engage in quality control. Not every crackpot can get up on a soapbox and expect to be published in an academic journal or be allowed to teach a course at Oxford or at Harvard. But that judgment of quality, do you have sources? Can you cite them? Do you have arguments? Do you have evidence? Has to be distinguished from opinions that you don't like because they're unfamiliar or they clash with your ideology. And in the case of, say, Kathleen Stock, whose opinions are, even if one may disagree with them, they are certainly perfectly well argued. I mean, she is a philosopher, as I understand it, and that's what philosophers do. That's what she does. It's completely absurd to not allow her to be heard because the ideas are so dangerous or so poisonous that even hearing them harms you, let alone refuting them. So at a university, universities are well deserving of contempt and scorn and ridicule for censoring voices like Kathleen Stock. I mean, not only are they not crazy beliefs, but they might even be defensible. They might even be correct by our best standards.
I feel, interestingly, a lot of intellectuals we've spoken to would agree with you. Peter Singer agrees that it's ridiculous to no platform her. Jeff McMahon agreed with platforming her. I'm curious, do you think, as someone who's obviously very familiar with the power of language and language as a speech act as well, as a psychologist and a linguist, what do you think about taboo and its effect in societal discourse? Do you think that perhaps by not addressing what could be classified as taboo topics, that it could maybe make them more powerful or even incite the opposite side to become more restless at the fact that their beliefs might be suppressed?
Yeah, it's taboo is a powerful psychological phenomenon. There is a psychologist named Philip Tetlock who studied the psychology of taboo. That is, ideas that are considered immoral to think. And he gives us examples, what he calls forbidden base rates. If you are a rational thinker, you should endorse applying the famous rule of the Reverend Thomas Bayes to your assessment of ideas based on evidence. Namely, you begin with a prior. That is, how likely is something to be true before you've even looked at the evidence, so that you've got some way of calibrating how seriously you take the evidence. And there are certain base rates, which is the most straightforward way of calculating a prior, that are considered immoral. Like, for example, racial base rates. If you are admitting someone to university, if you are trying someone for a crime, should you go to the data and say, well, how often do people of that race tend to commit crimes? And so we will convict this person of less evidence if they belong to a racial group that on average commits more crime. Now, I think most of us would recoil. I mean, we consider that just an evil thought to think, even though it is recommended as a normative principle by our best guideline to adjusting credence in beliefs according to strength of evidence, namely Bayes' rule. And so and studies have shown that if you even raise that possibility with people, they often recoil. Now, there's some contexts in which we do apply base rates. Young people have to pay more for car insurance than old people. Even in some way, that's unfair to younger people who might be safer drivers than older people. But there are some cases where we say, yeah, you should be a Bayesian and apply the base rates, and that's okay. Others where it is absolutely forbidden, and for justifiable reasons. That's an example of a taboo. Another one is what Tetlock calls taboo trade-offs. In any kind of sensible policy, and in fact, we talked about this earlier, there are always costs and benefits. There's nothing that is always good and never bad, or vice versa. And you can't just do one thing. So if you're implementing a policy, there's going to be positives and negatives. But there are some of these trade-offs that Tetlock points out that people consider taboo, such as weighing off money against human lives. Even though you kind of got to do that. If you're a mayor or a city councilor, you got to decide, should we pay millions and millions of pounds to build a pedestrian overpass that will save lives of people who won't be killed by collisions with cars, but that means we have less money to spend on schools and health clinics and so on. Well, you just can't get away from thinking, how much money is a human life worth? And life insurance companies and safety regulators, they don't like to publicize it, but they actually do have such a figure. However, if you bring it out into the open, people have an ick reaction and they consider it evil. And so you even have politicians saying nonsensical things like, we can't put a value on human life. We should protect the environment no matter what it costs. We must look after our senior citizens, and it would be terrible to think about what it costs us. How can you put a price on the well-being of our veterans and our seniors? That's another example of a taboo thought. Now, in academia, of course, we should be, in general, challenging taboos. We know that some of the past taboos have gotten in the way of human progress, human well-being. Galileo's endorsement of the heliocentric theory of the solar system, Darwin's theory of evolution, theories of the moral case for gay marriage, for women's suffrage, for abolition of slavery. All in their time there were sectors of society that considered those taboo. And so, in general, challenging taboos is one of the things that intellectuals and scholars and activists ought to do. Although it is a case could be made that some taboos are benign and should be respected in the same way that in everyday social interactions, there's some things that we know are true and that we don't say. You don't have to bring up the fact that someone is fat or has a speech impediment, and we consider that to be okay. Is that the case for intellectual investigation? Should we, for example, relentlessly study the racial or religious differences in school performance, in commission of different kind of crimes? There could be an argument that just as in polite society, there's some things that we know that we don't make explicit. Science, being a part of society, might sometimes say, don't go there. We'll just choose to study other things. So anyway, I'm not going to come down on one side or the other of the debate, but I will, that those are the issues at play. And I'll mention one more, because you mentioned that I am among other things, a linguist. And in my book, The Stuff of Thought, I had a chapter on taboo language. It's called The 7 Words You Can't Say on Television. Which is the title of a comedy routine by the American comedian George Carlin, on why there are certain words that just uttering them are taboo. Traditionally, these
would you like to list them for us?
Pardon me? There's some that shit, fuck, cunt, asshole, tits. There are. It used to be damn, hell, Jesus Christ, bloody. Used to be a taboo. If you've seen the Shaw play Pygmalion, or the musical adaptation My Fair Lady, you remember that there's a scene where Eliza Doolittle says, "Not bloody likely," and it not only shocked her fictional companions in the scene, but when it was shown on the British stage in 1913, it scandalized the audience that someone on the stage said bloody. In fact, and now that changed. In fact, I should clarify what I said. By the time Pygmalion, the stage play, was adapted to My Fair Lady, the Broadway musical, audiences had gotten so used to the word bloody that the scene just wouldn't have worked anymore. No one would have understood why the people were so offended. And so they rewrote the scene so that Eliza Doolittle at the Ascot races, shouted out, "Move your bloomin' arse" to the at the horse jockey. And that was the shocker by 1950s sensibilities. Nowadays, that wouldn't be a shock, but it was set, of course, in an earlier time. So audiences understood that by the standards of the day, that was taboo. Now, we still have taboos, and there's one that I think I'm not even going to mention, although I have in my previous talks, and I did in the book, and that is words for racial minorities, such as the word that in the United States we have to refer to as the N-word. Now, as someone who wants to understand how language works, and more generally, someone who just wants to kind of crack the nut of human nature, human interaction, human behavior, I think it's absurd that you cannot utter the word. Philosophers distinguish between using a word and mentioning a word. Using meaning it is woven into conversation with its customary meaning and connotation. Mention means you're a linguist, you're a philosopher, you're a scholar, you're putting it in quotation marks, and you're talking about the word qua word. Now, we now have a taboo against even mentioning the so-called N-word. I have in the past. I think I'm not going to now because sensibilities have changed. I think it's okay, but I don't particularly want to rain abuse on me, or for that matter, you guys, by actually blurting it out, even though I think there's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I think there's a benefit to blurting it out, because it, as someone who believes that the more we understand about ourselves, the better off we are, and the more we understand about the world, the idea that actually speaking a word can alter reality is a kind of primitive thinking, sometimes called word magic. It's behind spells and curses and blessings. But the first lesson of linguistics is that just going blah, 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 can't change the word by itself. The only way that language has an effect on the world is by the way in which listeners interpret the sound and the particular convention that sound corresponds to some thought, some meaning, some intention. And the idea that actually even being a linguist and discussing the word can itself somehow harm the members of that racial minority is a bit of primitive thinking that I think we would be better off transcending. That is, having the insight, language is is a convention. It is not a way of impinging on the world. But that's the world we live in, and that's just a battle that I'm not going to fight today here.
Yeah, I mean, just to push back on that a little bit from a linguistic perspective, I think the fact that it's convention actually might support the use of not saying it, because I think that convention makes the utterance of the word a speech act, i.e. doing more than just saying. And that speech act is demonstrating perhaps a disregard for that taboo, and as a result, a disregard for that racial minority, whether or not theoretically it might be okay to mention as opposed to use the word. I'm not sure if you know what I mean.
I mean, you could say that. It seems to me, again, I'm being a little hypocritical here because I'm not going to flout it here and now. But when we adopt the stance of analysts, of thinkers, of scientists, of scholars, then, of course, it is not the speech act of disrespecting or encouraging contempt for the group. It is the speech act of analyzing our own practices, our own behavior, our own norms. And I think public discourse should be at a level where you can appreciate that difference. That is, you can put something under the microscope. Just as if you're an obstetrician and you discuss the female genitalia and you even put a slide up, or if you're a breast cancer surgeon, that's not pornography. And to say that, say, at a scientific conference, or for that matter, at a health clinic, well, you should never show a picture of a breast because that's what Pornhub does. That would be absurd. I think, although hypocritically, I'm not going to press the point. I have in the past, but I'm not going to do it here. That discussing, say, the N word, the C word, the K word, and by actually blurting it out is like showing a diagram of the breast in a health clinic on self-examination.
So I think I'll leave that up to our listeners before we press the point too much.
Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying the episode. I just wanted to drop you in a word from our sponsor Manscaped. You can use the discount code LOAF to get your discount, because even a lion needs to tame its mane.
Get the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra from Manscaped now. Stay fresh with no cuts, so that your baguette leaves no crumbs.